Losing her left a silence in the house that no words could fill. But what came next broke something deeper. The people I trusted, the ones I believed were family, started pushing me out, treating my life like it was theirs to decide. The walls that once held our laughter now echoed with cold words and broken promises. This isn't just a story about a home or money. It's about betrayal that cuts quiet and deep, and a fight to hold on to what's left when everything feels like it's slipping away. If you want to hear how this unfolded, please like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from in the comments. I'm listening. My name is Walter Green, and I'm 68 years old. I spent 36 years as a senior financial analyst for a private energy firm before retiring early to take care of my wife, Evelyn, when her cancer returned. We lived in this house in Scottsdale, Arizona, for almost 4 decades, raised our son here, buried pets in the garden, celebrated birthdays, graduations, and just last year, our 43rd anniversary. I built a life brick by brick, check by check. I wasn't wealthy, but I was prepared. I'd built our home, built our future, and believed I'd built a family strong enough to withstand loss. That belief began to crumble at the dinner table. The roast I made sat untouched on their plates. I had made it out of habit, really, seasoning it the way Evelyn liked it, even though she wasn't here anymore. Brian hadn't even looked at me properly since he arrived. Amanda just smiled politely when she walked in, commented on the smell of rosemary, then scrolled through her phone until the food was served. The clock above the mantel ticked steadily, a metronome of rising tension. Then Brian cleared his throat, not loudly, just enough to quiet the room. "Dad," he said, voice forced, too smooth. "Amanda and I have been talking. This house it's a lot for you now." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "I mean, it's big. You're alone. And now that now that she's gone, we really think it's time to consider other options." I glanced at Amanda, who was looking at me the way someone looks at a loose floorboard, with subtle disdain and a sense that it was overdue for removal. "Options?" I asked slowly. Amanda jumped in. "There's a place in Tempe. Really nice. Assisted living, private rooms, meals provided, nurses on site. We even went there last week to check it out. It's lovely." She smiled like she was offering me a cruise ticket. Brian slid a glossy brochure across the table. "It has a garden, too. You love gardening." I didn't touch it. So this was all decided without me? Brian's tone hardened. "Dad, come on. We're trying to help. You can't handle this place on your own. It's too much house. Too many stairs. You could fall. And besides," he added, pausing for effect, "we can help manage the sale of the house. You'll get a great return right now. The market's still decent." And there it was. The real motive. A return. A sale. A transaction. Amanda chimed in again. "You've done so much for us over the years. Let us take care of you now. It'll be less stress for everyone." I stared at the kitchen window behind them, at the small bird feeder Evelyn had insisted on hanging. She loved watching the finches fight over seeds in the morning. I couldn't believe they were doing this now, 7 days after we lowered her into the ground. 7 days since I kissed her forehead and whispered that I'd keep everything safe. "This house," I said, placing my fork down, "is the last thing your mother touched. Every inch of it is her." Amanda responded too quickly. "And it always will be. That doesn't mean you have to live here forever. Memories stay in our hearts, not in walls." Her tone was soft, but the subtext was steel. I looked back at Brian. "And what happens to the proceeds from a sale?" Brian shifted in his seat. "We put it into a trust, cover your care, make sure you're set up for the long term. Honestly, it's the best plan." I nodded once. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I stood slowly, folded my napkin, and walked to the entryway. I grabbed my jacket from the hook, the same one Evelyn sewed a new lining into 3 winters ago. "Where are you going?" Brian asked, trying to keep his voice light. "For a drive. I said without looking at him. The porch light flickered as I stepped outside. I still hadn't replaced the bulb Evelyn asked about before her last hospital stay. She never reminded me a second time. She trusted I'd remember. I got in the car and backed out of the driveway. I didn't drive aimlessly. I knew exactly where I was going. The streets of Scottsdale hadn't changed much since I retired 3 years ago. I pulled into the parking lot of Desert Ridge Credit Union, the place I call my second home for most of my adult life. It was dark now, closed for the night, but I didn't need to go inside. I stood in the hallway staring at the wedding photo Evelyn hung there herself, back when she believed pictures made a house feel alive. I didn't take off my jacket. I walked straight into the study and turned on the lamp. Its amber glow softened the shadows in the room, but it didn't warm me. This wasn't about comfort anymore. This was about clarity. I moved slowly to the old oak filing cabinet in the corner, the one Evelyn once teased me about for being too organized, like a museum for paperwork. She always laughed when I labeled things down to the month, the account, the signature. But tonight it all paid off. Because numbers don't forget. Numbers don't manipulate. Numbers tell the truth when people stop doing so. I pulled out the thick folder marked Brian, Education, and laid it on the desk. Inside, the first receipt I touched was dated June 3rd, 2006. Tuition deposit to Arizona State University, $2,500. From there, the records flowed like a timeline of trust. 4 years of semester payments, meal plans, housing deposits, books, and lab fees. I flipped through them one by one, reading each figure like it was a line of poetry. The grand total? $102,347. Not including the $6,200 for a spring semester study abroad program in Barcelona, which I'd funded after Brian called me late one night, nearly in tears, saying, "Dad, this could change my whole perspective." I had transferred the money the next morning without telling Evelyn, just to surprise him. And I remember the email he sent me from Spain that ended with, "I'll make you proud, Dad." I swear it. I opened the next folder, labeled Brian and Amanda, Support. The first document was a personal check I wrote on October 22nd, 2012 for $18,000, down payment on their first home. I remember Amanda hugging Evelyn in the kitchen, crying, saying, "We never thought we'd be able to own anything this soon." I remember how proud Evelyn looked, how she whispered to me, "That's what parents do." Then came the car loan we helped co-sign when Brian's Toyota broke down in 2015. The loan was for $9,800. I remember the way Brian had said, "I just need a reliable ride to work, Dad. I'm not asking for a handout." I had smiled and nodded, not saying a word about the fact that I knew his credit score had already been slipping. I remembered the emergency fund for Amanda's dental surgery, $4, $600, and the $3,200 for fertility treatments that didn't take. There were dozens of smaller checks, transfers, and credit authorizations I'd written without hesitation. Each one was attached to a crisis or a dream. Each one was paid without a lecture. I found the wedding file next. Evelyn had handled most of it, but I still kept the records. Venue deposit, $5,000. Catering, $6,200. Photographer, $2,750. Dress alterations. DJ, florist, cake. Altogether, $23,890. And that didn't even count the honeymoon fund we contributed to behind the scenes, just so they could fly to Maui without worrying about airfare. Evelyn had insisted. Let them start their marriage with joy, not stress. And when Brian raised his glass at the rehearsal dinner, he toasted to the most generous parents in the world. That toast cost me $600 in champagne, but I hadn't minded. I opened the last major folder marked business. Brian had always dreamed of working for himself. In 2019, he started Green Tech Home Repair, and I backed him with a $27,000 loan to get the license buy equipment, and build the website. Within 6 months, he was asking for more, another $20,000 to scale. I had some doubts then, and Evelyn did too, but we didn't say no. He's trying, she had said. He's not asking for a car or a trip to Vegas. That second check was never paid back, and the business quietly folded a year later. The equipment was sold, the website taken down, and Brian never brought up again. But I remembered. I added up the subtotals on a yellow legal pad and underlined the final number, $204,337. That was how much I had invested, given to Brian and Amanda over the past 18 years. And now, they wanted me out of my house like I was a stray dog that wandered in one night and overstayed his welcome. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the wall. On it was a framed photo of Brian at age 6, standing in the backyard with a kite in his hand, looking up at the sky like he owned the wind. I had taken that photo. Evelyn had cried when she printed it. I wondered if Brian remembered that day at all. I wondered what kind of man looks at his father, still grieving, and thinks the best solution is assisted living with meal trays and bingo schedules. I looked down at the spreadsheet I had begun building on my laptop. Line by line, gift by gift, a chronology of generosity. It wasn't for revenge. It was for truth. Because if they wanted to turn this relationship into a ledger, then I would show them what a real ledger looked like. I wanted like a man doing inventory. After 36 years in financial strategy, you don't barge into war. You observe. You verify. You position. At the front desk, I was greeted by a new receptionist, young, polite, and unaware of who I used to be. But in the back office sat an old colleague who did remember. Walter Green, James said, rising from his leather chair with a grin. You planning to come out of retirement on me? I shook his hand, firm as always. Not quite, but I need your help. James had been the bank's VP of lending services when I retired, and his sharp eye for risk had saved us more than once. He gestured for me to sit, offered coffee, which I declined, then opened his laptop as I slid over paper with 2 names. My son and his wife, I said flatly. I need to understand my financial exposure. He didn't blink. In banking, when someone says that, it means the house is on fire, and they're just checking which room started it. Within minutes, James pulled up the mortgage records first. You co-signed on their original home loan in 2014. Fixed rate, 25 years. But it was refinanced in 2018 to pull equity. Are you aware of that? My eyebrows lifted slightly. I was not. He turned the screen toward me. Home equity line of credit opened February 2018. Maximum draw amount, $40,000. Currently at $39,600. Last payment? 43 days ago. My pulse didn't quicken. My face didn't change. But something in my gut twisted. Amanda must have initiated the refinance. She always managed the paperwork, kept Brian in the loop only when it was convenient. James clicked over to another screen. Their primary mortgage is 2 months behind. That's 60 days of delinquency. Next month, that triggers a notice of default. If they miss that, foreclosure proceedings begin within 90 days. I folded my hands together. So they're underwater, and I'm on the hook. James nodded, careful with his words. If they default and the home is repossessed, the deficiency balance becomes your liability as co-signer. And with the HELOC nearly maxed out, there's little equity left to recover. I didn't need him to explain the rest. I'd written the policies that govern these situations. I asked him to pull up any other accounts tied to my name. After a brief search, he frowned. You also co-guaranteed a business equipment loan for Green Tech Services. That rang a bell. My son's failed company, I said. How much? Loan originated for $27,000. There was an extension granted in late 2020. Balance due with penalties and interest, $38,900. Last payment was over 120 days ago. It's in pre-default status. That one did sting. Not because of the number, but because I remember the night Brian asked me for that second round. We were standing in the backyard grilling steaks. Evelyn was inside, making salad. He said it would be the push he needed. I gave him the money the next morning. James clicked again. Credit card counts? For open accounts under their names. All near max, total revolving debt, $22,000. I leaned back slightly in the chair. Total exposure? He tapped his keyboard, leaned forward, and said, conservatively, with mortgage, HELOC, business loan, and potential deficiency balances, about $120,000 in risk to your name if they stop paying entirely. I nodded slowly. James, I need everything in writing. A full report of accounts tied to me, risk assessments, payment history, status updates, and copies of all cosigner documentation. Of course, he said. Can I ask what you plan to do? I smiled faintly. Protect my interests. He didn't press further. That's what I liked about James. He understood when not to ask questions. 30 minutes later, I left the bank with a folder under my arm and a storm brewing behind my eyes. As I drove back home, I didn't listen to the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just thought about the fact that Brian and Amanda had known their finances were crumbling even before Evelyn passed. That their plea to move me out wasn't just selfish, it was strategic. If I sold a house, they'd be off the hook. Their debts would be insulated, their credit saved. They weren't just trying to send me away. They were trying to make me absorb the collapse of everything they'd built on borrowed time. I parked in my driveway, walked inside, and set the bank folder on the same desk where Evelyn once wrote Christmas cards. I turned on my laptop and began scanning every document. Then I opened a fresh file titled Financial Liabilities Green Household. I input each loan, each default, each ballooning number. I created tabs: mortgage, business, credit, cosign liability, default timeline, legal notes. Then I opened my copy of the Arizona Revised Statutes. Evelyn always called me obsessive for downloading a PDF of the state's lending laws, but now that obsession was about to pay dividends. Under Arizona Code Section 47 to 3605, cosigners maintain the right to request full disclosure, to initiate demand for repayment, and in cases of material misrepresentation or unauthorized use of credit, to seek legal removal from obligation through civil process. I highlighted the paragraph. I copied it into my notes, and I bookmarked 3 attorneys in the area who specialized in elder financial abuse, just in case things escalated. They'd try to play me like a pawn, but I was always a chess player, and they'd given me every piece I needed to checkmate them with their own paperwork. They're holding a room for you. Amanda must have written that one. I didn't reply to that either. Instead, I spent the morning doing what I was trained to do, analyzing risk and preparing countermeasures. The numbers James gave me weren't just liabilities, they were leverage points. I laid the printed reports out on the dining room table, the same table where Brian had delivered his betrayal. Each document represented a crack in the mask he wore, a fracture in the illusion he and Amanda had spent years trying to maintain. I knew the timing of their pitch hadn't been random. They'd waited exactly 1 week after Evelyn's funeral, not out of respect, but because they knew that grief would make me quieter, slower, less likely to challenge them. What they didn't account for was that grief, when paired with clarity, could become an incredibly dangerous thing. I had no interest in publicly humiliating them, at least not yet. What I wanted first was control, not revenge, just control. Step 1 was securing my own position. If they were counting on me to sell the house or transfer the deed, I needed to make sure that was legally impossible. I called a friend of mine from my days in lending compliance. Her name was Deborah Mason, now a private consultant for estate planning and asset protection. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, but the moment she heard my voice, she said, Walter, you don't call unless someone's about to get audited or sued. Which is it? I gave her a summary of the situation in 5 sentences. She let out a long sigh and said, "Do you have a current will? Revocable trust? Power of attorney on file?" I told her I had the basics, but they hadn't been updated since Evelyn's diagnosis. "Then let's start there," she said. "I'll have my assistant send over the intake forms. I want you to lock the house under a revocable living trust with you as the sole trustee. No one touches it, not without a court order." I hung up with her and felt something shift inside me, like I had just placed the first sandbag on the levee before a flood. I spent the afternoon reviewing the trust documents she sent, filling in every detail with slow precision. I named no successor trustee. I gave no family member access. I included clauses about medical events, mental capacity evaluations, and full legal autonomy. By the time the sun had dipped behind the horizon, my home was no longer just a house. It was a legal fortress. Step 2 was watching them squirm. I didn't need to confront them. Not yet. Let them keep texting, keep planning. Let them keep assuming I was confused or vulnerable. Let them walk themselves deeper into the trap. That evening, I pulled up my bank's credit monitoring dashboard. Every account tied to my name, co-signed or otherwise, was tracked there. I turned on immediate alerts for every financial action taken by Brian or Amanda. If they applied for another loan, I'd know. If they missed another payment, I'd know. If they tried to refinance the home without my knowledge again, I'd have evidence. Step 3 was pressure. Pressure that felt natural, like bad luck. I made a few phone calls the next day, nothing malicious, just conversations. I called an old colleague who now worked at a local business credit bureau and casually mentioned my concerns about Green Tech's unpaid equipment loan. I framed it as a routine background check, the way consultants do when vetting potential partnerships. He promised to flag the file for a soft review. I called the HOA where Brian and Amanda lived and requested a printed copy of their bylaws and payment history. The woman on the phone, unaware of the context, mentioned they'd been late twice last year and were sent notices. I made a note. That kind of information had value. Maybe not now, but later when context mattered. I also contacted my homeowner's insurance company and increased my liability coverage, just in case Brian tried to involve me in a dispute over shared assets or inheritance. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared. Evelyn would have said I was nesting, but she would have also understood. She knew what it took to stay ahead of people who thought they were smarter than you. On Thursday, I saw them drive by the house. I was in the front garden, pruning the rose bushes she planted a decade ago. Amanda slowed the car slightly, probably hoping to catch my eye. I didn't look up. I didn't wave. I didn't react. I simply snipped dead petals and dropped them in the basket like nothing in the world concerned me but the health of those flowers. That night, another message came. "Dad, hope you're doing okay. We're really trying to help here. The offer for Tempe is only good until Friday. They said the room is going fast." I stared at the phone for a long time. Then I set it face down on the table and poured myself a glass of bourbon. It wasn't the desperation that bothered me. It was the assumption that I was too blind to see it. Friday morning, I signed the documents Deborah had prepared and had them notarized at her office. She looked at me over the edge of her reading glasses and said, "You've done this before." I smiled and replied, "I've been doing this my whole life, just never with my own blood." She didn't offer sympathy. She offered something better, clarity. On my way home, I stopped by the post office and mailed myself certified copies of everything. One to my safety deposit box. The first phone call came just after 10. I was in the garage sharpening my gardening shears when Brian's name lit up the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hey, Dad," he said, cheerful, falsely casual. "Just checking in. You feeling okay?" I paused a moment. "I'm fine." "That's good. He replied quickly. Amanda and I were talking, and we've hit a bit of a snag. He cleared his throat. Not a huge deal, just some unexpected expenses popped up, and with the market being what it is, we're juggling a little more than expected. I didn't speak. I let the silence hang there until he had to fill it. Basically, we could use a little help, he said, voice lower now, more careful. 15,000 would get us back on track, just for a few weeks. We'd pay it back, with interest. There it was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. I simply said, no. The silence that followed was longer, thicker, and I could hear his breathing change. Dad, I don't think you understand. This isn't for luxury stuff. We're behind on the mortgage. Not officially, not yet, but it's getting tight. If we don't get caught up, we could lose the house. You mean the house I co-signed? I asked flatly. He hesitated. Yes, but we've always made good on it. You know that. No, I corrected. You've made some payments. I've carried the risk. There's a difference. Okay, he said, trying to shift tone again. I get that you're upset, but can we be practical? You have the money. We just need a bridge. That's all. I'm not a bridge, I said. I'm not a bailout. Not anymore. Your family, he snapped, losing control for the first time. Family helps each other. You didn't say that last week when you told me to pack my bags, I replied. He went quiet again. That was Amanda, he muttered. She was emotional. She didn't mean it. You agreed with her. I was stressed. I didn't think it through. But come on, Dad, this is serious. Yes, I said, my voice still calm. It is. Which is why I won't lend you another dollar. We're not asking for a gift, he insisted. We'll sign something. You can hold us to it. I already held you to things. You failed. This isn't like before, he said, pleading now. This is different. That's what you said about the business loan, the second mortgage, the credit card you used to float payroll. You've been looking at our finances, he said, his tone shifting from desperation to fear. I have a right to, I replied. I'm legally tied to your failures. They're not failures, he said defensively. They're setbacks. And you're turning your back on us over a setback? No, I said. I'm choosing not to subsidize your incompetence. So that's it? After everything? He asked. You're just done? Yes, I said. Completely. I ended the call and turned the phone off. 10 minutes later, Amanda's number appeared on my landline. I didn't answer. Her voice filled the answering machine like it used to fill my kitchen, overly sweet and entirely false. Walter, it's Amanda. I know things got a little intense with Brian just now. I just want to say, we didn't mean to upset you. We just had a really hard month, and you've always been so generous. We'd be happy to come by and talk face to face. Maybe bring over dinner? Let us make it right. She didn't mention the money. That was strategic. Say sorry first, then circle back to the ask. I erased the message without listening to the end. That evening, I took a walk around the block. It was something Evelyn and I used to do after dinner, just to watch the sky shift from gold to ash. The neighbors were out, watering plants, unloading groceries. People waved. I waved back. None of them knew what was happening behind the doors of my family. That was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, not the manipulation, but the performance of normalcy. That night, I checked my credit alerts. 2 new inquiries had come through. Amanda had applied for a personal loan. Denied. Brian had applied for an emergency line of credit. Denied. I smiled slightly. They were scrambling. 3 more alerts since midnight. Amanda had applied for a same-day deposit loan at a predatory lender with a 38% interest rate. Rejected. Brian had tried for a balance transfer card. Also denied. Then he submitted an application for a peer-to-peer funding platform, probably hoping that his business failure hadn't hit their internal network yet. No luck. Every rejection meant their credit score had dropped further, which meant every new application was less likely to succeed. The spiral had officially begun. I didn't rejoice. I didn't lean back and gloat. I simply took a slow sip and recorded every move on my growing spreadsheet titled Exposure Timeline. One column logged the date and time of the loan application. The next column labeled whether they had disclosed this attempt to me. Spoiler alert, they never did. I wasn't tracking their downfall to feel powerful. I was tracking it because they had tied their drowning ship to my name and were trying to drag me down with it. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning out the garage, not because it needed it, but because Evelyn always said, movement clears your mind. And mine needed to be sharp. Around 2 p.m., I received an automated email from the mortgage lender that handles their house note. A system-generated notice had flagged the account as Stage 2 delinquent, subject to collection protocol. That meant they were now officially 90 days behind on payments. 60 days was the warning phase. 90 days was the cliff. I called the bank's collections department, not to plead or interfere, but to confirm liability. I spoke with a woman named Shauna, who seemed new but competent. After verifying my identity, she informed me that a notice of intent to foreclose had already been prepared and would be delivered within 5 business days. She paused and said, "Mr. Green, are you still a financial guarantor on this property?" "I am," I said, "but not for much longer." That night, I drove past their neighborhood. I wasn't stalking them. I wasn't angry. I was simply gathering intelligence. The way you observe a bridge you once built, now starting to crumble, and you just want to see how it collapses. Their car was in the driveway. The porch light was off, which was unusual. I parked down the street, partially hidden behind the branches of an old mesquite tree, and watched from a distance. About 20 minutes later, Amanda came outside with a bag of trash, dropped it into the bin, then stood there for a moment, rubbing her temples like the weight of her choices had started pressing against her skull. A few moments later, Brian stepped out. They spoke in low voices. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language said everything. She pointed toward the mailbox. He shook his head. She threw her hands up. As she walked back inside, he remained standing under the porch light, arms crossed, staring into the darkness. As I drove home, I remembered something Evelyn had said the night Brian told us he wanted to start his own business. "He's got a lot of heart," she'd said, "but he doesn't understand gravity. He always thinks there's a net." And I had been that net for years, always catching, always cushioning the fall. But now the net was gone, and he was beginning to feel what real free fall felt like. The next morning, I stopped by my favorite coffee shop, Common Grounds on East Shea Boulevard. It's where most of the retired finance folks still gather, and I was due for a little social recon. I sat down with Margaret Walsh, former branch manager at First National. We hadn't spoken in months, not since Evelyn's memorial service, but she greeted me with a hug and an eyebrow raise. "You look like a man who's not here for the lattes," she said. "I'm here for truth," I said. We talked for a few minutes about old times, then I gently shifted the conversation. "Did the name Brian Green cross your desk lately?" I asked, voice low. She sipped her drink, then nodded. 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Credit inquiries, emergency funding request, even tried for a business overdraft. We declined all of them. "His DTI is a train wreck." 60%. I asked. "Closer to 64, she said. "You know that's toxic in this lending climate." I nodded. "I do. That's why I've stopped co-signing and started documenting." She leaned in. "You think they're going under?" "I know they are," I said. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Brian, but this time it didn't include a plea or a justification. Just 6 words, "We really need to talk, Dad." I stared at it for a long time. He didn't deserve a response, but I knew what he was trying to do. He was setting the stage for an emotional play, one built not on logic or accountability, but desperation and family guilt. But I was done playing that game. Around 8 p.m., I walked into my office and opened my filing cabinet. I pulled out the folder labeled Green Household Financial Statements and placed it beside the trust documents I had signed with Deborah just days earlier. Then I opened my laptop and drafted a simple, short email address to my attorney of record. It read, "As discussed, please initiate the preparation of documentation to revoke all future financial guarantees not contractually enforceable. Attached is a timeline of delinquency and misuse of co-signed credit facilities. I am requesting full removal from all voluntary financial obligations where permissible under Arizona law." No Amanda in sight. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Dad," he said, trying to look grateful, maybe humble. I raised an eyebrow. "You're here early. It's Sunday. Can I come in?" I let him stand there in the silence for 5 full seconds before I opened the door wider and nodded toward the kitchen. "You want coffee?" "Sure," he said. "Black." I poured him a cup and returned to my toast. He sat down at the table like it was his first time here, though he'd eaten in that same seat hundreds of times since childhood. But today he didn't look like a son visiting his father. He looked like a man walking into a bank meeting with no leverage and no collateral. "Amanda didn't want me to come," he began. "That's wise of her," I said. He ignored the jab and took a sip of coffee. "Dad, I know we've had our differences lately." "This isn't about differences, Brian," I interrupted. "This is about debt, disrespect, and deception." He swallowed hard and looked down. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage." "I know," I said. He looked up sharply. You know, I've always known. I was copied on the original loan documents. I received the notices." "You thought what?" "That I'd forgotten." He leaned back, defeated. "I was hoping we could work something out." I cut into my toast slowly. "You're not here to work something out. You're here to make one last ask before the foreclosure hits the county records." "It doesn't have to get there," he said. "We could sell the house quickly. Maybe take a small loss, but sell it." I asked, setting my knife down. "You think you can sell that house?" He looked confused. "Of course. It's still technically ours." "No," I said. "It's not. Not legally. Not anymore." He blinked. "What are you talking about?" I stood, walked into my office, and returned with a folder, the trust documents notarized and filed. I slid them across the table. "This house," I said, gesturing around us, "has been moved into a private revocable trust. I'm the sole trustee. It's protected. No sale, no lien, no signature from you or Amanda changes that." "Wait," he said, reaching for the folder. "You put the house in a trust." "I put everything in a trust. The house, the vehicles, the remaining retirement accounts. And I've already filed to legally detach myself from your loans. I can't erase the past, but I won't fund your future mistakes." "You can't do that," he said, stunned. "I already did," I replied. He pushed the folder away and stood up, pacing. "So that's it? You're just cutting us off?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." "You've always been cold," he muttered. "You never forgave me for leaving finance, did you? You think I was a failure the second I walked away from your perfect little legacy." "This isn't about legacy," I said. "It's about accountability. You made choices, and now you're living with them." "Amanda said you were obsessed with control," he snapped. "She said this whole thing was about punishing us." "Amanda," I said slowly, "has spent the last 5 years living beyond her means, dragging you along for the ride. Designer bags, resort trips, high-end furniture. She turned your marriage into a performance for people who don't care. And you let her." His face turned red. "You don't get to talk about my wife like that." "Then stop asking me to clean up her mess," I said. "She doesn't need a father-in-law. She needs a financial advisor and a therapist." He stepped back, shaken. I could see the weight of it crashing down. Mortgage notices, maxed out credit cards, the business debt, and now this. The realization that the one person he thought he could pressure into saving him had cut off every escape route. "So what do we do now?" he asked, voice hollow. "You," I said, "do whatever you want." But this house is not part of your solution. We could lose everything, he whispered. Sometimes that's what it takes, I replied. Sometimes people have to hit bottom before they stop digging. He didn't argue. He just stood there, staring at the floor. Does Amanda know? He asked. Not yet, I said. But she will. He nodded slowly. She's going to lose it. She already has, I said. He looked at me one more time, but this time his eyes were different. Not angry, not pleading. Just tired, defeated. He turned and walked toward the front door. As he opened it, I said, Brian? He paused. Yeah. This is still your home, if you want to visit. But not as a beggar. As my son. When you're ready to rebuild, with honesty, I'll be here. He didn't respond. Just walked out, closed the door behind him, and left me standing there in the quiet. When I opened it, there they were, Brian looking tired, Amanda tried to muster some semblance of composure. Neither spoke at first. I stepped aside, allowing them entry but not offering any warmth. I led them into the living room, where the afternoon sun spilled softly across the hardwood floor. I took my usual seat in the leather armchair, the one Martha and I had claimed years ago as our refuge, and gestured toward the couch where they reluctantly sat on the edge, faces tight with unspoken words. I suppose you have something to discuss, I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Amanda swallowed hard, and Brian nodded. Dad, we're in serious trouble, Amanda began, eyes glossy with restrained emotion. We made mistakes. We didn't plan properly. We shouldn't have pushed so hard. Mistakes? I echoed, my tone clinical. Financial reckoning, perhaps. Care to elaborate. Brian glanced at Amanda, then back at me. We're behind on payments. The business failed, credit shot. We're scared. We need help. I leaned forward, steepling my fingers. Help is a broad term. What exactly are you asking for? Amanda's voice cracked slightly. We need a loan, Dad. $40,000 would give us breathing room. I nodded slowly, absorbing their desperation. 40,000. I'll let the number hang there like a challenge. You realize that's a fraction of the debt you owe? Brian looked away. It's a start. Is it? I pressed. You've asked for 15,000 before. I said no. And now 40,000. What changed? We've exhausted other options, Amanda said. We want to pay you back with interest. We'll sign legal documents. Anything you want. I regarded them quietly. You say you made mistakes. Do you understand the impact? The years of support, the loans, the guarantees. Amanda wiped a tear from her cheek. Yes, and we're sorry. Sorry is a word, I said softly, but it doesn't clear debt. I stood slowly and walked over to the filing cabinet. I pulled out the folder marked Financial Timeline and spread it on the coffee table. This, I said, tapping the top document, is everything I have on your finances over the last 2 decades. Education costs, wedding expenses, business loans, mortgage payments. Every dollar I've given or guaranteed. Amanda's breath caught, and Brian's jaw tightened. You planned this, Brian said, voice low and incredulous. Every loan, every denial, every foreclosure notice, it's all here. Not planned, I corrected. Documented. Prepared. I looked them both in the eye. You threatened to make me disappear from my own home. You told me to pack my bags and leave. You tried to erase my place in this family. Amanda sobbed quietly. We were scared. We didn't know what else to do. Fear does not excuse betrayal, I said. You used my grief as leverage. You weaponized my love. Brian clenched his fists. You blacklisted us at the bank. You ruined our credit. I informed them of risk, I said evenly. That's my job. You're a monster, Amanda whispered. I'm a man protecting what's mine, I replied. And I'm done being taken for granted. The room fell silent except for Amanda's quiet sobbing. Brian looked as if he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. After a long pause, I said, before I consider helping you, there are terms. Amanda wiped her eyes and nodded. Anything, she said. I pointed to the folder. First, a public apology, written, signed, and published in the neighborhood newsletter and on social media, acknowledging your mistreatment of me. Humiliate ourselves? Brian asked, shocked. Correct the record about who I am and what I've done. Amanda nodded slowly. Okay. Second, I said, you will treat me with respect as the family patriarch. No more orders about where I live or how I spend my money. Brian muttered, fine. Third, I said, any assistance will come with conditions. Financial transparency, counseling for your marriage, and employment I approve. Amanda looked down, swallowing. Control us. Brian said bitterly. Protect an investment, I said. I reached for my checkbook and tore off a check for $25,000. This will prevent foreclosure and give you breathing room. But it's not a lifestyle restoration. It's a bridge to stability. They stared at the check like it was both salvation and poison. If you refuse these terms, I said, you leave my house and solve your problems on your own. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Amanda said, we accept. All of it. Brian's jaw worked like he was chewing glass, but he nodded. Good, I said, holding up the check just out of reach. You get this tomorrow after the apology is published. Consider tonight your chance to reflect on how much your circumstances have changed. I walked them to the door. Their defeated posture was a stark contrast to the arrogant couple who'd tried to exile me 2 weeks ago. One final thought, I said as they stepped onto the porch. You assumed I was weak because I was grieving, generous because I was loving, helpless because I was older. You confused kindness with stupidity and patience with powerlessness. Brian turned back, face twisted with impotent rage. This isn't over, Walter. You're right, I said. It's not over. It's just beginning with new management. The same streets where I had raised Brian and held countless family celebrations suddenly felt alien, charged with an undercurrent of betrayal and tension. The terms I had laid out were clear and uncompromising. Public apology, respect, financial accountability, counseling, and strict oversight. It was not mercy. It was justice balanced with an opportunity for redemption. I knew that for people used to taking without consequence, this level of accountability would feel like a cage closing in. The following days confirmed my anticipation. Brian and Amanda had no choice but to respond publicly. The neighborhood newsletter ran their carefully worded apology, one laced with regret but bare of excuses. They posted it on social media, where neighbors commented with a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. It was a humiliating, necessary first step. Privately, however, the dynamic shifted rapidly. The relief of having access to Walter's partial financial support came tangled with the new constraints. They had to submit monthly progress reports detailing income, expenses, and debt reduction plans. Attendance records from counseling sessions arrived weekly. Employment verifications confirmed Brian had taken a temp job, far from the ambitions he once claimed. The pressure was relentless, and it began to wear on them. One afternoon, while I was working in the garden, a familiar car slowed in front of the house. Amanda stepped out, her face drawn and weary, clutching a thick folder. She approached cautiously, as if unsure whether I'd welcome her presence. I didn't say a word. I simply gestured toward a chair on the porch. She sat down, then exhaled deeply. Walter, she began hesitantly, I know things have been rough. Brian and I are trying, really trying. I nodded, not interrupting. I came to bring the latest reports as promised. Our debts are down slightly. The mortgage is current this month, and Brian's working full-time. I looked at the folder. The spreadsheets were detailed, numbers in neat columns. Progress, yes, but slow and shaky. Amanda continued. I wanted to ask, is there any chance we could adjust the terms? The monthly payments are a struggle, and the counseling is difficult. I folded my hands calmly. The terms were set to protect the investment and encourage real change, not to punish you. She bit her lip. I understand, but sometimes I feel like we're drowning. We want to do better. We need some breathing room. I looked her in the eyes. Change is never comfortable, but it's necessary. Amanda nodded slowly. Thank you for giving us a chance. She rose, leaving the folder on the table. As she walked away, I felt a strange mixture of pity and resolve. They were struggling, yes, but it was of their own making. The following week brought a shift. Brian was called into his temp job manager's office. Word had gotten out about the financial chaos surrounding his family, and his professionalism was being questioned. The temp agency was considering ending his contract early. The news hit Brian hard, but also forced a reckoning. Without stable work, the payments would falter. At home, arguments erupted, the stress fraying the thin veneer of civility they had maintained. Amanda cried one evening over the phone, telling me she felt overwhelmed, that the weight of the past years was crushing her. I listened without offering false comforts. You made your choices, I said gently. Now you live with the consequences. Yet despite the tension, a quiet transformation began. They started attending community financial literacy classes, requested job counseling, and even volunteered at a local food bank. Small steps, but meaningful. I observed all of this through my network of contacts, friends, neighbors, even a discreet inquiry through the HOA. I documented their progress and setbacks, a record for future decisions. The house remained mine, safe from their grasp, but I watched as they fought to regain footing in the ruins of what they had lost. One afternoon, I received an unexpected text from Brian. Dad, can we meet? Need to talk. I replied simply, when and where. We met at a local coffee shop, a neutral ground. Brian was different, less defensive, more humbled. I'm sorry, he said, for everything. I see now what I lost, what I almost lost. I nodded. Recognition is the first step. What comes next is action. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life, but also, strangely, some of the most illuminating. Watching Brian and Amanda stumble and struggle as they tried to rebuild was a test of patience and resilience. Not just theirs, but mine as well. The fragile trust between us was slowly being stitched back together, one difficult conversation, one honest admission at a time. It was not an easy path. There were setbacks, missed payments, harsh words, moments when I wondered if the damage was too deep to repair. But through it all, I held firm to one conviction: that real change requires accountability, but also grace. One chilly evening, as the sun set behind the desert hills and painted the sky in deep shades of crimson and gold, I found myself sitting alone on the porch. The roses Martha had nurtured bloomed wildly around me, stubborn and beautiful as ever. I thought about everything we'd been through, my years of sacrifice, their recklessness, the pain and betrayal, and now this slow, cautious hope. I reached for my phone and saw a message from Brian. Dad, thank you for not giving up on us. It was simple, but it carried a weight that no sum of money ever could. I typed back, family is more than transactions. It's about standing together, even when it's hard. That night, I reflected on what justice really meant. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about restoring balance and dignity, about holding people accountable, but also giving them a chance to heal. I realized that in protecting myself, I had also protected what Martha and I built: the family, the home, the legacy. But more importantly, I had reminded my son that love without boundaries is not love at all. Over the following year, Brian found steady work and began taking financial classes seriously. Amanda enrolled in counseling and slowly mended bridges she had burned with family and friends. They honored every condition we set, not out of fear, but out of genuine desire to change. And in turn, I softened too, offering support when earned, allowing them space to prove their commitment. One afternoon, Brian invited me over for dinner. The house was humble, a far cry from the sprawling estate I had once co-signed on. But the warmth in the air was unmistakable. As we ate, he said quietly, "Dad, I want you to know this journey has changed me. Not just financially, but as a man, as a husband, as a father someday." I looked at him and saw the man I had once hoped he'd become, a man capable of responsibility, humility, and growth. That night, as I drove home under a canopy of stars, I felt a profound peace settle over me. Life had taught me many lessons, but the most important was this: strength is not measured by how much you can give, but by how firmly you can hold your ground when the ones you love forget their own. Martha's garden was still growing, tended by hands that knew both pain and perseverance. So was my family, still flawed, still healing, but moving forward. I parked my car, stepped onto the porch, and breathed in the cool desert air. The house behind me stood firm, a symbol not just of bricks and mortar, but of endurance and hope. The story was far from over, but the next chapters would be written with a new understanding, one born of love, respect, and the unyielding belief that even after the darkest storms, the sun will rise again. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story stood out to you the most? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. Your support really means a lot as I share these personal journeys. Thanks for being here.